The flame was born in her hand. It was a greedy, living thing, a child of the lamp oil she had so carefully spilled. It licked at the fine Aubusson rug, a thirsty yellow tongue tasting the intricate wool flowers woven by hands in a land she would never see. The air in the dining room of the Beaumont house, already thick with the scent of roasted pork and spiced wine, grew instantly hotter, heavier, charged with a new and terrible perfume, kerosene and purpose. Master Beaumont sat at the head of his long mahogany table, a king in his small, cruel kingdom. His face, usually a mask of placid authority, was slack with the contentment of a full belly and a third glass of claret. He was in the middle of a sentence, something about the price of cotton, his voice a low, rumbling drone that had been the soundtrack to Sarah's misery for 20 years. He never finished it. The fire did not creep. It lunged. It leapt from the rug to the heavy damask curtains with a roar, consuming the crimson fabric in a furious blossom of orange and black. Glass in the tall windows overlooking the garden cracked from the sudden, violent heat, a sound like winter ice breaking on a pond. Beaumont's eyes, the pale, flat blue of a dead sky, widened. For a single frozen moment there was no sound but the triumphant crackle of the blaze. Then came the scream. It was not a scream of command or anger, the kind Sarah was used to. It was a thin, high, animal shriek of pure terror. He pushed his heavy chair back, but the fire, a predator that had been waiting its whole life for this moment, was faster. It surged across the polished floor, a wave of liquid light, and climbed the leg of the table, then his trousers. He was a torch. A screaming, flailing torch in a suit of fine English wool. Sarah did not stay to watch. She had seen enough of his face for one lifetime. She was already moving, her bare feet silent on the heart-pine floors of the hallway. Behind her, the dining room was turning into a furnace, the shrieks of her master now joined by the panicked cries of his wife, who had been in the adjoining parlor. The sounds were distant, unimportant, like noises from another world. The only world that mattered now was the one in front of her, the one that began past the kitchen door, beyond the smokehouse, and deep within the swallowing darkness of the cypress swamp. She carried nothing, not a crust of bread, not a spare bit of cloth. Her only possessions were the simple cotton shift on her back, the memories branded onto her soul, and the small, puckered scar on the palm of her right hand. It was an old scar, shaped vaguely like a falling star, a permanent reminder of the day. Her world had ended, so that this one, the world of fire and flight, could begin. She pushed open the heavy kitchen door, and the cool, damp night air hit her face. It smelled of jasmine and mud and the coming rain. It smelled of freedom. Behind her, the great house on the Ashley River was beginning to glow, a monstrous Jacko lantern announcing a new and terrible holiday. She did not look back. She slipped into the darkness, a ghost leaving her own haunting behind, and ran. The swamp was a different kind of darkness. It was not the simple absence of light she knew from the slave quarters, but a living, breathing entity. The air, thick as wet wool, clung to her skin. Cypress knees, gnarled and ancient, like the knuckles of drowned giants, rose from the black, still water waiting to trip her. The sucking mud pulled at her ankles, trying to claim her, to hold her fast in this place of rot and rebirth. The symphony of the night was overwhelming. The hypnotic thrum of a million insects, the guttural bellow of a bull gator somewhere in the deep water, the sudden, frantic splash of a fleeing marsh rabbit. Fear was a cold knot in her belly, but it was a different kind of fear from the one she had lived with every day under Beaumont's roof. That was the fear of a trapped animal. This was the fear of a hunted one. There was a difference. One was a slow death. The other was, at least, a life. She ran until her lungs burned, and her legs were slick with mud and bloody scratches from unseen brambles. She found a small hummock of dry land, a tiny island crowned by a massive live oak draped in ghostly shawls of Spanish moss, and collapsed at its base. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the violent expulsion of 2 decades of pent-up silence. The fire replayed itself behind her closed eyes. The blooming orange, the smell of burning wool and something else, something sickeningly sweet and savory, like the pork he had been eating. She pressed the scarred palm of her hand against the rough bark of the tree, grounding herself. The scar. It always came back to the scar. It was a map of her pain, etched into her flesh on the day they took her 3rd child, her little Samuel. Beaumont had not used the whip that day. The whip was for the field hands, for breaking bodies, for a house slave who had dared to weep too loudly, who had clung to the leg of the man from the trader's office. He had wanted something more intimate, more permanent. He had taken the fire poker, its tip glowing a dull cherry red from the hearth, and pressed it into her open palm as the overseer held her down. "A reminder," he had said, his voice calm, almost gentle, "of who owns your hands, of who owns your sorrow." He had been right. He had owned her sorrow. He had owned the hollow space in her arms where her firstborn, Eliza, used to rest. He had owned the phantom weight of her second, a boy named Marcus, sold south to the sugar fields of Louisiana. And he had owned the final, shattering grief for Samuel, her last, her beautiful boy, with his wide, curious eyes. 3 children. 3 sales. 3 goodbyes that were not goodbyes at all, but amputations of the soul. After the 3rd one, something inside her had grown quiet and cold and hard. A seed of vengeance had been planted in the barren soil of her grief, and she had tended to it in the dark, watering it with silent tears and whispered promises. The poker had taught her a lesson, but not the one Beaumont had intended. It had taught her that fire was not just for warmth or for cooking. Fire was a tool. Fire could cleanse. A sound snapped her back to the present, the distant, mournful baying of hounds. They were coming. Of course they were. A burned master, a missing slave. The equation was simple, its solution brutal. She scrambled to her feet, her exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a surge of pure, primal adrenaline. She plunged back into the water, wading through the chest-deep channel, knowing the water would hide her scent. The dogs were a sound, then a presence, their howls echoing through the cathedral of cypress trees, getting closer. She could hear the shouts of men, their voices cutting through the humid air. One voice was clearer than the others, sharp and commanding. Blackwood, the overseer, a man who seemed to enjoy his work with a quiet, methodical relish. She found a hollow in the base of a colossal cypress tree, a space barely large enough for her to squeeze into, the water lapping at her waist. She pulled thick curtains of moss over the opening and held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sounds grew louder. Lanterns bobbed through the darkness, their yellow beams slicing through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping arms. She saw them then, a pack of them, Blackwood in the lead, holding a lantern high, his face grim and set. 2 other white men with long rifles, and the slave-catcher, a man named Finch, with his half-dozen lean, hungry-looking dogs straining at their leashes, their noses to the ground, whining with frustrated desire. "She came this way." Blackwood's voice was a low growl. "The water's confused 'em, but she's in here. A she-devil like that, she'll think the swamp's her friend." Finch spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dark water. "Ain't no one's friend in here, Mr. Blackwood. The gators and the cottonmouths, they don't take sides. We'll find her. Or what's left of her." They passed so close to her hiding spot that she could smell the sweat on the men, the sour scent of the dogs, the whiskey on Finch's breath. She pressed herself further into the hollow, her scarred hand clenching into a fist so tight her knuckles ached. She did not breathe. She became part of the tree, part of the water, part of the ancient, waiting darkness. The lanterns moved on, their light receding, the voices fading until they were just murmurs, and then gone. The baying of the dogs grew fainter, moving north. She waited for what felt like an eternity, listening to the return of the swamp's natural chorus, before she dared to move. She was alone again, but she knew this was just the beginning. The hunt had begun. Blackwood would not give up. He was like Beaumont, a man who believed in ownership, in order. A broken rule was an insult to his world, and she had not just broken a rule, she had shattered the foundation of his universe. She was not just a runaway. She was a murderer, an arsonist, an idea, and they would hunt the idea even more relentlessly than they would hunt the woman. She began to move, wading south, deeper into the swamp, away from the direction they were heading. Every shadow was a threat, every splash a potential discovery. Her past was a burning house behind her, her future an impenetrable wilderness ahead. And in the terrifying, exhilarating space between, she was, for the first time in her life, truly, terribly alive. Dora Lake, the news of Beaumont's death spread through the low country like a fever. It was a story told in hushed tones in the slave quarters, a grim cautionary tale whispered over brandy in the drawing rooms of Charleston. A master, a respected man of property, incinerated at his own dinner table, by his own house slave. It was an inversion of the natural order, a horror story that confirmed every planter's deepest, most unspoken fear, that the placid, obedient faces that served them their meals and raised their children concealed a simmering, unknowable rage. In the days that followed, the Beaumont plantation was a hive of grim activity. The Charleston constabulary came and went, their boots crunching on the gravel drive. They interviewed the other slaves, their questions sharp, accusatory. Did you see Sarah? Did she speak of running? Did she have help? The answers were a chorus of shaking heads and downcast eyes. Fear was a powerful enforcer of silence. No one knew anything. No one saw anything. Sarah had simply vanished, an apparition who had left only ashes and a legend in her wake. Mrs. Beaumont, a woman who had always seemed to be made of porcelain and lace, had shattered. Her grief was a wild theatrical thing, punctuated by shrieks and fainting spells. But beneath the hysteria, a cold, hard knot of fury was forming. She summoned Overseer Blackwood to the blackened, stinking ruin of the dining room. The smell of char and death still hung heavy in the air, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. "You will find her, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She was dressed in black silk, her face pale and drawn. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care how long it takes. I want her found." "We're doing all we can, ma'am," Blackwood replied, his hat in his hands. He was a tall, spare man with eyes the color of rust. He looked at the charred remains of the master's chair with a dispassionate, professional gaze. "The swamp is vast. She could be anywhere." "Then I suggest you look everywhere," Mrs. Beaumont snapped. "And when you find her, I do not want her brought back for trial. A trial is too clean, too quick. I want her made an example of. I want every slave from here to the Santee to hear what happens to a monster who raises a hand against her master." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "I want her to suffer. I want her to burn." Blackwood nodded slowly. He understood. This was not about justice anymore. It was about terror. It was about re-establishing the order of things. The first bounty posters appeared a week later, nailed to the doors of courthouses and general stores, on trees at major crossroads. The first bounty dozen times $500 reward for the apprehension of the negress, Sarah, property of the late Master Thomas Beaumont. Approximately 35 years of age, of middling height, slender build, speaks well, is known to be clever and deceitful, has a noticeable burn scar on the palm of her right hand. She is wanted for the crimes of arson and murder. The above reward will be paid for her capture and delivery to Overseer Blackwood at the Beaumont plantation. A higher sum will be considered for proof of her demise. The crudely drawn sketch beneath the words looked nothing like her. It was a caricature of a face, with wild eyes and thick lips, a monster from a child's nightmare. But the words were what mattered. Times a noticeable burn scar on the palm of her right hand notes her mark, her signature. It would betray her as surely as her face. Blackwood was a man of systems. He kept a meticulous ledger bound in cheap leather, where he recorded the business of the plantation. Cotton yields, supplies purchased, punishments administered. His handwriting was a precise, disciplined script, each letter perfectly formed, betraying a mind that craved order and control. In the days after the fire, he made a new entry. Times, October 17th, 1849. Master Thomas Beaumont, deceased by act of arson, committed by the negress Sarah. Pursuit initiated with Finch's dogs. Lost scent at Black Creek due to high water. Presumed she is moving south or west. Sent word to patrols along the Combahee and the Edisto. Posted bills in Charleston, Dorchester, and Walterboro. She cannot have gone far. She has no food, no aid. Hunger and fear will be my allies. She is an animal, and she will be cornered like one. Expense for posters, $4. Expense for extra men, $15. The cost of restoring order, incalculable. He underestimated her. He thought of her as an animal, driven by panic and instinct. He could not conceive of the cold, clear purpose that now guided her. She was not just running away from something. She was moving toward an idea, a half-formed dream of a place where her body and her soul were her own. The North. Canada. A name whispered like a prayer in the dead of night in the quarters. A place as distant and mythical as heaven. For 2 weeks, Sarah lived in the twilight world of the Great Cypress Swamp. She learned its rhythms, its secrets. She learned to read the ripples on the water, to tell the difference between the call of a night heron and the cry of a bobcat. She learned which roots were edible, which berries would sicken her. She moved by night, navigating by the North Star when the sky was clear, by the feel of the moss on the trees when it was not. During the day she would find a secluded spot, a hollow log or a thicket of palmetto, and sleep the exhausted, fitful sleep of the hunted. Her mind was a maelstrom of memory and sensation. The smell of wood smoke from a distant chimney would send a jolt of terror through her, making her think of the burning house. The cry of a child from a passing barge on the river would bring a wave of grief, so profound it would buckle her knees, the ghosts of her 3 lost children rising up to haunt her. Eliza, with her mother's hands, Marcus with his serious, solemn face, and Samuel, her baby, her last hope, his laughter like the sound of tiny bells. They were with her always, their faces shimmering in the dark water, their voices whispering in the rustle of the leaves, her lullaby. The one her own mother had sung to her a lifetime ago, before she too had been sold away. It was a simple tune, a gullah melody about the river carrying you home. Water spirit, deep and wide, Aster John, take my trouble on the tide, moon be shinin', guide my feet, Aster John, make my freedom taste so sweet. She would hum it to herself in the deepest, darkest moments, the melody, a fragile thread, connecting her to a past of love and a future of hope. It was a prayer, a mantra, a shield against the despair that was a constant, lurking predator. One night, huddled in the rain, shivering and weak with hunger, she saw a light, a single, flickering candle in the window of a small, isolated cabin on the edge of the swamp. It was a risk, a terrible one. The cabin could belong to poor whites, people who would turn her in for a fraction of the reward money without a second thought. Or it could belong to free blacks, or even another runaway. Hope and fear warred within her. Hunger made the decision for her. She approached the cabin with the silence of a ghost. Peeking through a crack in the rough-hewn boards, she saw an old woman sitting by the fire, her dark face a road map of wrinkles, her hands busy mending a fishing net. There was no one else. Sarah took a breath and knocked softly on the door. The woman opened it a crack, her eyes sharp and suspicious. She held a heavy iron skillet in one hand. "What you want?" she asked, her voice a low rasp. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I mean no harm. I am hungry." The old woman studied her for a long moment. She looked at Sarah's torn and filthy dress, her scratched face, the wildness in her eyes. Then her gaze dropped to Sarah's hands, which she was holding clasped in front of her. "Show me your hands," the woman commanded. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hesitated. "Show them to me, girl. Palms up." Slowly, heart pounding, Sarah opened her hands. The faint candlelight from the cabin fell upon her right palm, illuminating the pale, puckered tissue of the star-shaped scar. The old woman's eyes narrowed. She had seen the posters. She knew who Sarah was. This was it. It was over. But the woman did not scream or raise the alarm. Instead, she looked back up at Sarah's face, and in her ancient eyes, Sarah saw not fear or condemnation, but a flicker of something else. Understanding, perhaps even respect. The woman sighed, a long, weary sound. "The devil is looking for you," she said softly, "and he has many helpers." She opened the door wider. "Get in here before he finds you. The night has eyes." Her name was Hephzibah. She was a free woman, born and raised on the edge of this swamp, living a solitary life by trapping and fishing. She asked no questions about the fire or the master, and Sarah offered no explanations. The scar was story enough. Hephzibah shared her meager meal of corn pone and boiled fish, and it was the most delicious food Sarah had ever tasted. She gave Sarah a blanket to sleep by the fire, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah slept without fear of the hounds. "They are hunting the river now," Hephzibah told her the next morning, giving her a small bundle of dried meat and a piece of hardtack. "Blackwood, they call him. He is a patient man. You cannot stay on the water. You must go overland. Follow the cypress stands north. They grow where the land is lowest and wettest, where a horse cannot easily go. When you reach the Santee, find the ferry run by a man named Jupiter. He is one of us. Tell him the jasmine is in bloom, even in autumn. He will know what it means." Jasmine. The word was a key, unlocking a memory so old and sweet it was almost painful. Her mother, standing by the door of their cabin, a sprig of night-blooming jasmine tucked behind her ear. The scent had filled their tiny world, a perfume of impossible grace in a place of utter degradation. Her mother had been sold when Sarah was just 7. Sarah had never smelled jasmine again, without feeling the ghost of that final, frantic embrace. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her throat thick with emotion. "I have nothing to give you." Hephzibah waved a dismissive hand. "Freedom ain't something you buy, child. You take it. You guard it. Now go. And may your God, or mine, or the spirit of this swamp, hide you from their sight." Sarah slipped back into the wilderness, her body a little stronger, her spirit fortified by a stranger's kindness. She now had a direction, a destination, the Santee River, and a password, a secret garden from her own past. The jasmine is in bloom, even in autumn, a scrap of poetry in a world of brutal prose. She held the phrase in her mind, a talisman against the dangers ahead. Meanwhile, Blackwood was growing frustrated. His meticulous notes chronicled his failure. October 29th, 1849. No sign of the woman. Questioned the free black population near Jacksonboro. They are a closed-mouthed, sullen lot. Believe they are hiding her. Found a camp near the Ashepoo, but it was days old. Just a few fish bones and the remains of a small fire. She is clever. Moves only at night. Finch's dogs are useless in this terrain. The reward has brought out every low-life tracker and patroller in the county, but they are clumsy and loud. They will only serve to warn her. November 3, 1849. A theory. She is not moving randomly. She has a destination. The North. It is a fairy tale they tell each other, but a powerful one. She will need to cross the Santee. I will move my search east, focus on the ferries and fording spots. She will have to surface from the swamp eventually. And when she does, I will be waiting. I have sent a rider ahead with a fresh supply of posters. I want her face, or the drawing of it, to be everywhere. I want her to know, there is no escape. I will have her. The honor of the Beaumont name, the very principle of our society, demands it. The hunt and the flight had become a chess match, played across 100 miles of swamp and pine barren. He was a man of maps and logic, of straight lines and predictable moves. She was a creature of intuition and memory, of shadow and water. One of them was bound to make a mistake. Sarah traveled for another week, her world shrinking to the primal concerns of survival: water, food, shelter, and the constant, gnawing fear of discovery. The landscape began to change, the deep cypress swamp giving way to vast pine forests and sandy soil. The going was harder here, the cover less complete. She knew she was getting closer to the Santee, and with it, a new level of danger. She had to leave the relative safety of the wilderness and approach the world of men again. She saw the posters in a small settlement, a place called St. Stephen. She was hiding in the woods at the edge of the village, waiting for nightfall, when a farmer nailed a fresh one to a large oak tree. She watched from the shadows as people stopped to look at it. A white woman pulled her child closer. Two men spoke in low voices, gesturing north. She could feel their eyes, the eyes of the entire world, searching for her. She was a story now, a monster in their midst. Sarah, the arsonist. Sarah, the murderer. They did not know about Eliza or Marcus or Samuel. They did not know about the poker or the endless years of quiet desperation. They only knew the ending of the story, not the beginning. She skirted the town and pushed on, her hunger a dull ache, her body a collection of scrapes, bruises, and insect bites. 2 days later, through a curtain of trees, she saw it. The Santee. It was not a creek or a stream, but a great, wide, muddy artery. A formidable barrier of brown water, moving slowly but powerfully toward the sea. On the far bank lay the promise of the North. On this bank, she could almost feel Blackwood's cold, patient eyes. She found the ferry landing at dusk. It was a simple affair. A small, weathered shack and a sturdy-looking, rope-guided flatboat. A tall, broad-shouldered black man with graying temples was pulling a wagon and a pair of horses across the river. He moved with a slow, deliberate strength, his muscles working smoothly under his homespun shirt. Jupiter. It had to be him. Sarah waited in the woods until he had returned, and the last of the day's travelers had gone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her, with a sickening lurch, of the fire. The air grew cool. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the trees, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jupiter was coiling a rope, his back to her. He did not seem to hear her approach. "I need to cross," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned slowly. His face was impassive, his eyes deep-set and cautious. He looked her over, taking in her ragged appearance. "Ferry's closed for the night," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "Come back in the morning." He turned back to his rope. This was the moment. The test. Her hand, the one without the scar, went to the small bundle Hepzibah had given her. Her fingers felt the last piece of dried meat. She could offer it as payment. But the old woman had given her a different currency. "The jasmine is in bloom," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Even in autumn." Jupiter froze. He did not turn around for a long moment. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the river against the bank. When he finally faced her, his expression had changed. The caution was still there, but it was joined by something else. A weary resignation, a shared understanding of the secret war being fought in the shadows of the South. "The frost will kill the blooms soon," he said, his voice low. He scanned the road behind her, the woods around them. "The patrols have been thick these last few days. A man named Blackwood has been asking questions, offering money." He looked directly at her. "He is looking for a woman with a fire in her past." "I know," Sarah said. "Get on the boat," Jupiter said, untying the thick mooring rope. "The fare is silence, and you pay it on the other side by never looking back." As she stepped onto the ferry, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over her. But it was premature. From down the road, she heard a sound that turned her blood to ice. The unmistakable jingle of a horse's harness. A single rider, coming fast. "Get down," Jupiter hissed, shoving her flat against the rough planks of the boat. He threw a piece of dirty canvas over her. "Don't make a sound. Don't even breathe." The horse trotted up to the landing and stopped. Sarah, peeking through a small tear in the canvas, saw a pair of polished leather boots. Her eyes traveled up. Long coat. A rifle resting in the crook of an arm. And a face she knew from the swamp, a face from her nightmares. It was Blackwood. "Evening, Jupiter," Blackwood said, his voice deceptively casual. He remained in the saddle, looking down at the ferryman. "Late for a crossing, aren't you?" "Just tidying up for the night, sir," Jupiter said, his voice steady. "Headed home." Blackwood's gaze swept the ferry. It lingered on the lumpy canvas that concealed Sarah. "What's that you're carrying?" "Just some old sailcloth and ropes, sir, taking them home to mend." Sarah's heart felt like it would explode. He knew, he had to know. This was the end of the line. She could feel the scarred palm of her hand begin to ache, a phantom heat from a long extinguished fire. Blackwood dismounted, his boots thudding on the hard-packed earth. He walked slowly toward the boat, his spurs making a soft, metallic clicking sound. Each step was a lifetime. He stopped at the edge of the ferry, looming over her hiding place. He reached out a hand. Sarah braced herself, a silent scream trapped in her throat. He did not lift the canvas. Instead, he rested his hand on it, his fingers just inches from her face. He patted it once, twice, as if checking its contents. "You hear anything, Jupiter?" he asked, his voice still light, conversational. "Anything about a runaway?" "Woman from the Beaumont place. Caused a bit of trouble." "Folks are talking, sir," Jupiter said, his tone even. "Hard not to hear about it. Terrible thing." "It is," Blackwood agreed. He fell silent, his hand still resting on the canvas. The silence stretched, thin and taut, ready to snap. Sarah felt as if the weight of his hand could crush her. It was the hand of the law, of the master, of the entire world that had conspired to own her. Then, from the far side of the river, a sound drifted across the water. The baying of hounds. Not the frantic sound of a chase, but the lonely, searching call of a dog on a cold trail. Finch and his pack. They must have picked up her scent where she'd left the woods. Blackwood's head snapped up. He looked across the river, his eyes narrowing. "They've found something," he muttered, more to himself than to Jupiter. He took his hand off the canvas and walked back to his horse, his mind now on the hunt, the puzzle. "She's clever," he said, swinging into the saddle. "Doubled back, crossed downstream somewhere." He looked down at Jupiter. "If you see anything, you know who to tell. There's a lot of money involved. Enough to buy a man a new boat. A new life." "Yes, sir," Jupiter said. "I'll keep my eyes open." Blackwood grunted and spurred his horse, turning and riding back the way he had come, disappearing into the darkness. Neither Sarah nor Jupiter moved until the sound of his horse's hooves had completely faded away. Then Jupiter let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. He pulled the canvas off her. Sarah was trembling uncontrollably, her face wet with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "The river spirit was watching over you tonight, sister," Jupiter said softly. He began to push the ferry off from the bank, the thick pole finding purchase in the muddy riverbed. The boat began its slow, silent journey across the dark water. Sarah sat up and looked back at the shore she was leaving behind. It was just a dark line of trees, a place of ghosts and nightmares. Blackwood was still back there. The dogs were still back there. The entire apparatus of her bondage was still back there. But she was on the water, moving away. The gentle current of the Santee was pulling her toward the unknown, toward a new world. She looked down at her right hand, at the scar that had been her curse and her brand. Under the pale moonlight, it seemed to glow faintly, no longer a mark of ownership, but a symbol of her survival. She had passed through the fire, and now she was crossing the water. It felt like a baptism, a beginning. The lullaby her mother had sung to her came back, a whisper in her mind. "Nam's water spirit, deep and wide. Take my trouble on the tide." Mighty Stace. The river was taking her. It was carrying her home. Asterix. Asterix. Mighty Stace. The far bank of the Santee was not the promised land, but another kind of wilderness. The journey north was a succession of such crossings, each one a risk, each a small victory. Jupiter had given her a new name to ask for, a new place to seek, a new link in the invisible chain that stretched from the cotton fields of the south to the free soil of the north. She became a whisper, a ghost passed from one safe house to the next. She was hidden in the false bottoms of wagons, in secret compartments behind fireplaces, in the lofts of barns. She learned to live in the spaces in between, in the shadows and the silences. The name Sarah was buried, along with the life that went with it. She was called Ruth now, or Mary, or sometimes nothing at all. She worked when she could, her hands, accustomed to the delicate tasks of a house slave, proving useful. She could cook and clean and sew with a skill that made her valuable. But she never stayed in one place for long. The fear of Blackwood, of the bounty poster with its monstrous face and its damning description of her scar, was a constant companion. She learned to keep her right hand closed, or tucked into a pocket, to wear gloves even when it was not cold. The scar was a secret she guarded more closely than her own life. She moved through Virginia, then Maryland, the landscape changing, the air growing colder. The accents of the people, both black and white, shifted. She saw more free black communities, people who owned their own small farms, who walked with a straightness in their backs she had never seen before. It was a vision of a possible world, a world she had not allowed herself to dream of. But she also saw patrols, saw slave catchers checking the papers of any black person they encountered. The border of freedom was a porous, dangerous line. In a Quaker meeting house near the Pennsylvania border, hiding in a cramped attic space, she overheard a conversation. A traveling preacher was speaking to the farmer who was sheltering her. "The news from South Carolina is grim," the preacher said, his voice heavy. "They made a terrible example of a runaway from the Beaumont plantation, the one who did what she did." Sarah froze, her ear pressed to the floorboards. "I had heard she got away," the farmer said. "That was the story for a while," the preacher sighed. "But they found her, or so they claim. Found her body in the Santee River, weeks later, snagged on a log downstream. The overseer, a man named Blackwood, identified her by a piece of her dress. They held a sort of inquest. Declared her dead, drowned while escaping justice. They put her name on a plaque in the Charleston workhouse, a warning to all the others. Sarah felt a strange, dizzying sensation. She was dead. Officially, legally, she no longer existed. Sarah of Charleston, the fiery specter who had haunted the Low Country, had been extinguished, her story given a neat and tidy ending by the very people she had escaped. Blackwood had given up the hunt, but he had not surrendered the narrative. He had killed her on paper, erased her from the world of the living so that he could close his ledger and declare the matter settled. A slow smile spread across her face in the darkness of the attic. He thought he had buried her, but he had, in fact, given her the greatest gift of all, a second chance. A new life, born from a lie. She was no longer a runaway to be hunted, but a ghost, free to roam the world unseen. She finally made it to Philadelphia, a city teeming with life and chaos, with a large, vibrant community of free blacks. For the first time, she could walk down a street without feeling the constant weight of suspicion. She found work as a seamstress, her fine needlework earning her a modest but steady income. She rented a small room in a boarding house run by a stern but kind black woman who had bought her own freedom years before. But freedom was a complicated thing. It was not a single sunlit destination, but a daily negotiation with fear and memory. Every time she saw a poster for a runaway, her heart would seize. Every time she heard a Southern accent, the old fear would rise in her throat, and the ghosts of her children were always with her. She would see a little girl with bright ribbons in her hair, and her breath would catch, thinking of Eliza. A serious-looking boy carrying school books would make her ache for Marcus. The cry of a baby would be a physical pain, a sharp, stabbing reminder of Samuel. She had freed herself, but she could never free them. This was the bitter truth at the heart of her liberty. Her act of defiance, her fiery revenge, had been for them, but it had not saved them. They were still somewhere in the vast, cruel machinery of the South, their lives unknown to her. Were they alive? Were they well? Did they ever think of the mother who had been stolen from them? These were questions that would never be answered, a permanent, open wound in her soul. She lived a quiet, solitary life. She made few friends, trusting no one with the truth of her past. Her scar remained her secret. She found solace in small things: the taste of a fresh apple, the feel of a new piece of fabric, the sound of church bells on a Sunday morning. She taught herself to read and write, practicing the letters with a fierce determination, as if by mastering the written word she could somehow rewrite her own past. Her handwriting, unlike Blackwood's rigid script, was flowing and elegant, the hand of an artist. She would sometimes hum her mother's lullaby, the one about the river. The melody was the only thing she had left of her first life, a fragile, bittersweet inheritance. And sometimes, on a warm summer evening, the scent of jasmine would drift up from a neighbor's garden, and for a moment she would be a little girl again, standing by a cabin door in South Carolina, wrapped in a love so pure and profound it felt like it could conquer the world. But it couldn't. The world had been stronger. She never knew what became of Blackwood or the Beaumont plantation. She never knew that her story, the official, false version of it, had become a cautionary tale, and the real, whispered version had become a legend among the enslaved people of the Low Country. They didn't speak of Sarah who drowned. They spoke of Sarah who burned the devil in his house and then turned into a spark herself, flying away into the night sky. They said that on quiet nights, if you listened closely in the cypress swamp, you could still hear her humming her tune, a song of freedom that the water could not wash away and the earth could not bury. Sarah, or Ruth, or Mary, lived. She grew old. She saw the country tear itself apart in a great and terrible war. She saw the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that made real the dream she had seized for herself years before. She saw black soldiers marching in the streets of Philadelphia. She lived long enough to know that the world that had created her, the world that had taken her children, had been burned to the ground, just as she had burned the Beaumont dining room. Her own fire had been a small, personal apocalypse. This was a conflagration. It was a terrible, bloody, and beautiful thing to witness. She wondered if Eliza, Marcus, and Samuel had survived it. She wondered if they were out there somewhere, free. She prayed that they were. It was the only prayer she had left. She lived her life in the quiet spaces, a woman with no past. No one in her new world knew the story of the scar on her hand, a secret she would carry to her grave. They only knew her as a quiet, dignified woman who was a fine seamstress, who kept to herself, and who sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, would hum a strange, sad, and beautiful song about the river. *** no one en grite, Botard, Jart Jod. Times * 1928. Charleston, South Carolina. Eleanor Vance, a young, eager historian from Boston with a penchant for lost causes, carefully lifted the brittle, yellowed letter from the dusty trunk. The air in the attic of the old Rutledge mansion, where the last descendants of the Beaumont family now lived, was thick with the smell of decaying paper and forgotten time. The family, impoverished by the war and the changing world, had allowed her access to their archives for a small fee. She was researching domestic slave rebellions, a topic most of her colleagues considered morbid and obscure. The letter was from Eliza Beaumont, Thomas Beaumont's widow, to her sister in Virginia. It was dated December 1849, 2 months after the fire. The handwriting was spidery and erratic, full of sharp, angry strokes. "Dearest sister, know not how to endure this. The house still reeks of the smoke, a constant reminder of the horror of that night. Every shadow seems to hold her face, the face of that demon Sarah. I see her in my dreams, her eyes empty of recipe, all but a terrible cold fire. Mr. Blackwood assures me she is dead, that her body was pulled from the Santee, but I do not believe it. I cannot. A creature of such profound evil could not be killed by something as simple as water. She is out there still. I feel it in my bones. The other servants are useless, their faces a mask of sullen terror. They whisper about her, you know. They do not see her as a monster, but as some kind of avenging spirit. They say she flew away from the swamp on the back of a great black bird. Such foolish pagan nonsense, but it unnerves me all the same. The new girl, Chloe, dropped a serving dish yesterday, and I confess I screamed. I am a prisoner in my own home, haunted by the ghost of a woman who may not even be dead. Mr. Blackwood has closed his report, but I see the doubt in his eyes. He found a scrap of cloth, nothing more. He declared her dead to restore order, to quell the whispers, but he does not truly know, none of us do. We are living on top of a volcano, my dear sister, and we pretend the ground beneath our feet is solid rock. But I have felt the tremor. I have seen the fire from below. Eleanor placed the letter carefully on a piece of archival cloth. So the official story was a fabrication, a convenient lie. It confirmed her suspicions. The official records were one thing. The truth was often something else entirely, a story hidden in the margins, in the private fears of a letter writer. Her research took her next to the Sea Islands, to the Gullah Geechee communities that had retained so much of their African heritage. She was collecting folklore, stories passed down through generations. In a small cabin on St. Helena Island, she sat on the porch with an ancient woman named Amara, whose great-grandmother had been a field hand on a plantation neighboring the Beaumonts. "Oh, I know dat story," Amara said, her voice a low, musical rasp. She was weaving a sweetgrass basket, her gnarled fingers moving with a slow, hypnotic grace. "But you ain't gonna find it in no book. Dey call her Sally into Ashes. My grandmama, she tell me dis story." She told a tale, not of a desperate runaway, but of a powerful conjure woman. She said Sarah had 3 children, and each time the master sold one, he stole a piece of her soul. After the 3rd one, her soul was gone, and something else, something old and powerful from the motherland, moved in to take its place. "Dey say she ain't used no lamp oil," Amara chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Dey say she just point her finger, and de fire jump right out of it. She walk out de burnin', house without a single scorch on her dress. She walk into the swamp, and the water, moccasins, they bow their heads to let her pass. The overseer, Blackwood, he chase her, but she sing a song, a river song, and a great storm come up. The wind and the rain, they hide her. The river, it carry her away north. Some say she grow wings and fly. Some say she just walk on the water all the way to the free land. Amara paused in her weaving and held up her right hand. My grandmama say all the women who tell this story, we tell it wit, the hand closed. Like this, she made a fist. So we can hold on to a piece of that fire, the fire of freedom. Eleanor looked at the old woman's fist, and then she thought of the letter from the terrified widow. 2 stories, born from the same event, as different as night and day. One was a story of fear and a haunting. The other was a story of power and liberation. The official record said Sarah had drowned, a failed criminal. History had tried to erase her, to reduce her to a cautionary tale written by her enemies. But memory, stubborn and defiant, had turned her into a myth. Asterisk, asterisk, what is a life in the end? Is it the sum of its documented facts, the entries in a ledger, the words on a bounty poster, the finding of an inquest? Or is it the story that survives, the one whispered in the dark, the one that takes root in the soul of a people and blossoms into legend? Sarah of Charleston ceased to exist in the autumn of 1849, her name recorded on a list of the dead. But Sarah the idea, Sally into ashes, the woman who walked out of the fire and was carried away by the river, lived on. She became a story, and a story is a kind of freedom that no master can own and no grave can hold. Perhaps she died in the cold winters of the North, a lonely seamstress with a secret past. Perhaps she drowned in the churning waters of the Santee, a desperate woman whose luck had finally run out. Or perhaps, just perhaps, she learned to fly. The historical record is silent. It offers only a charred chair, a terrified letter, a false report, a scrap of cloth. But the human heart, which is the only true archive, tells a different tale. It speaks of a woman who was pushed past the limits of grief and endurance, who took the instrument of her branding, the fire, and turned it into an instrument of her liberation. It remembers a scar, not as a mark of shame, but as a star, a guide pointing north. And it hears, in the rustle of jasmine leaves on a summer night, the faint, defiant echo of a lullaby, a promise that even after the deepest loss, the river of the soul flows on, searching for the sea, searching for home.